Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I am Patrick Murphy from Bucknuts and 24/7 Sports. It's a big week. We're talking Ohio State, Michigan, the game. So big that I forgot to grab myself a beer. Actually, I have a lot to do the rest of the day, so I'm going to take it easy today. I do have some water, much to the disappointment, I assume, of many people out there, but lots to do this week. Plenty of drinking time to be had with the Thanksgiving holiday and the weekend after the game. But let's get into it. I don't want to waste a bunch of time. We're going to start today's podcast talking about the other side of the rivalry here. And we'll bring in Alejandro Zuniga from the Michigan Insider, the 24/7 Sports Michigan website. Alejandro, how's it going, man?
It's going well. I'm glad this game's finally here. It's been a long 365 days, a lot of football, non-football stuff, but it's my favorite week of the year. Love Thanksgiving, love this rivalry, and just so excited to be able to be there on Saturday.
Yeah, a long 365 days is made even longer when you lose this game, right? When whichever team does not come out on top. The last two seasons, that has been Ohio State. 15 of the 16 times previous, it was Michigan. I want to start by asking you kind of the vibe in Ann Arbor as we head into this game. Obviously, that's where the game will be played. Having won 2 games in a row, let's just talk on the football field right now, sort of what people feel like for this game. We can get to some of the off-field stuff here in a little bit, but just how are the Michigan fans feeling about Ohio State coming to town?
Yeah, I think for most of the year, I think the feeling has been confidence. We've seen what Michigan's been able to do against Ohio State each of the last couple of years. And quite frankly, this, as we've talked about all fall, like Michigan came into this season feeling like this could be a national championship year type of season. And I don't think anything that's really happened this fall on the football field, at least, has really changed those expectations, right? Like Michigan hasn't really been tested. And, that's in large part because of their own scheduling decisions. It's in large part because the Big Ten, frankly, isn't very good this year, outside of maybe the top 3 of Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. But Michigan comes into this game feeling like it's one of the best teams in the country. And, knowing what happened the last couple of years, knowing that they're getting the Buckeyes at home, when we talked, when we thought about this game, maybe before 2021, I think Michigan fans probably felt like Ohio State was this invincible beast that, as you mentioned, Michigan just hadn't beaten them. It seemed like this mountain that couldn't be summited. And then once it happened, it's like the dam broke a little bit. And all of a sudden, look, this team is vulnerable, is what Michigan fans feel. Michigan seems like it has a formula to beat Ohio State. And why not have that formula continue on November 25th at home with a team that Michigan feels like can win it all this year?
The last 2 weeks, Michigan went to Penn State and got the first really challenging win for the Wolverines, as you mentioned, of the season. The second half, able to run the ball nearly every play. Last week against Maryland, gets up, 21-0.
There was a 3 in there somewhere. I don't know. There were safeties. There were, kicks out of the end zone.
Right.
It was a little wild. It was a big enough lead that felt like it was going to be a blowout, and then it very much was not.
Yeah. So has that changed from an outside perspective, changed any thoughts about this game, these last 2 weeks of these were kind of the first real challenges? The games were maybe closer than the games earlier in the year, or Michigan fans viewing that as, hey, look, Penn State's a really good team. They played really well against Ohio State, and that was a close game. Maryland was the week before the Ohio State game on the road. Just kind of what if anything, have the last 2 weeks changed in people's minds?
Yeah, I think looking, again, at the football aspect of it, when you look at the Penn State game, listen, it was very impressive that Michigan ran the ball 32 straight times to win that game. It was, look, we can still do this. We can prove it. We can tell you exactly what we're going to do every single play, because we're going to have 9 offensive linemen out there and you're still not going to be able to stop us. But the reason they did that, right? The reason they did that is because Michigan could not block Penn State's edge rushers. And that, I think, is a concern going into the Ohio State game. The right tackle in particular, Carson Barnhart, had a ton of issues against Penn State. And he had issues also, the following week, last week against Maryland. Two lackluster performances that, when the level of competition is increasing and we know what Ohio State brings to the table, that raises concerns. So that's a matchup I will be looking at very closely. Is Michigan going to be comfortable dropping back and passing the ball against a very talented defensive line? Because they didn't have to against Penn State, but they also really couldn't, right? JJ McCarthy does go 7 for 8, but he is under pressure every single time he drops back. And that's why Michigan shifts its game plan entirely. Similar on the defensive side of the ball, where there are really no top 25 passing offenses that Michigan had faced before Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
Maryland, I think, is number 26 at this point, but Ohio State is the best passing offense Michigan's faced. And a lot of what we think about Michigan's defense is based on the returning players and what they were able to do last year, right? Will Johnson had a fantastic freshman season. Rod Moore, Makari Page, the two safeties, had very solid years last year. Rod Moore in particular. All three of them have been dinged up. Like, they were dinged up earlier in the season. They've gotten healthy, but they haven't really been tested by potent passing offenses. Talia Tagovailoa had a pretty decent game, right? He had his normal Tagovailoa, tributes where he had some really awful turnovers. He had a fumble returned for a touchdown. He threw a couple of interceptions. It was a windy day, so that may have had a factor. But also, Josh Wallace, the corner who transferred from UMass, he got beat over the top a couple times. Will Johnson, the 5-star, he got beat over the top for, a deep play that was called a touchdown. I think they ultimately ruled it at the 1. But, the secondary was beaten in ways we haven't seen all season. And that could be, it was just the week before Ohio State. Or it could be that was the first decent passing offense Michigan has seen all fall.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, like mental gymnastics here. You look a year ago, Ohio State goes to Maryland, same situation, has to win the game. I think they had a fumble that they recovered for a touchdown late that made it look a little bit better. Michigan was at Illinois, right? And that game was
it was home against Illinois last year.
Okay.
Yep.
And obviously Michigan had some guys that didn't play in that game, but just trying to figure out, okay, is this real, or is this just teams looking ahead? I mean, Ohio State was only up 13-0 against Minnesota at home last week at halftime. Yeah. So I do find it every year interesting, kind of as we head into the game. We've seen it before, records, momentum. It doesn't necessarily matter. But I know that's been talked about a lot in Columbus is, well, Michigan didn't look great after the first quarter or so in College Park. We'll see on Saturday. Let's get into that. I was on your show earlier. We went position by position with Ohio State. We won't go as detailed into that, but I will ask you about a few things here. You mentioned JJ McCarthy earlier. It's looked like from watching on TV, he's been a little banged up. Is that fair to say? And what's kind of your expectation for him health-wise in this game?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I don't think it's anything structural or anything of that nature. I mean, I don't know if it was the Penn State game or what, but he took a shot to the legs, and whether that's a bone bruise or something along those lines, but certainly looked a little bit hobbled pregame at Maryland, looked decent enough during the game. I think the big thing with him, Michigan has been very careful about when they choose to run the ball with JJ McCarthy, in large part because they know that if JJ goes down, the ceiling for this team falls along with him, right? Yeah. So we saw Michigan utilize JJ McCarthy against Penn State. In fact, they ran basically power with him, where they would just snap the ball to him and he'll take off, and picked up a couple first downs in that department. But against Maryland, all of the non-conference teams, and basically any game that Michigan felt this year that they did not have to run JJ McCarthy to win the game, they did not run JJ McCarthy. I think that's going to change against Ohio State because his legs add so much dynamism to this offense in so many ways, right? There is, of course, he's a very talented runner, so he can pick up yards on the ground, as Ohio State saw last year. But also when you show live reads, when you present that option to a linebacker, to a safety, it causes that split second of confusion that opens up the interior run game, right? And then, as I mentioned, there are potential issues at the tackle position. JJ is going to have to scramble. He's going to have to keep plays alive somehow. He's going to, Michigan's going to want to run the ball, but you need to have JJ McCarthy playing one of his better games. As we've talked back and forth about Kyle McCord versus JJ McCarthy, I think Michigan feels pretty comfortable in that for the first time in a very long time, it could have the better quarterback coming into this game. It's been a while since Michigan could say that. And that's not a slight to Kyle McCord, who's had a very good year. But, JJ McCarthy, this is year 2 as a starter versus year 1 for McCord. This is his 3rd time playing in this rivalry, 2nd time starting in it. It's at home. It's all of these things. And if Michigan needs JJ McCarthy to be the better quarterback on Saturday, I think he can be. But, the last couple of weeks have not been his strongest performances for sure.
You got me trying to think here. When was the last time you could definitely say Michigan had the better quarterback in this game? It's been a while. I mean, we may be going back to like Chad Henne.
Yeah, I mean, even Henne, I don't remember in 2007. I know he got to the game. He was injured. He couldn't throw the ball. He had I remember Ryan Mallett played a significant portion of that game. Rest in peace. Denard Robinson, in 2011, that was that freshman Braxton Miller for Ohio State, where it's was Denard Robinson the best quarterback? No, but he was maybe the better quarterback for that situation. But it's been a long time, right? And listen, JJ McCarthy is not going to win the Heisman Trophy this year. There was, a period where, a 1-week stretch where he was the favorite. And I kind of laughed at anyone who really bought into that. Even before the season, it's not a Michigan offense that's going to rely on a quarterback enough that he's going to win the Heisman ever. But he is a very good quarterback. And he, for the most part, there have been 2 games this year, the Maryland game last week and the Bowling Green game the 3rd week of the season, where he has made mistakes. Outside of those 2 games, he hasn't thrown an interception. He hasn't really had any game-breaking mistakes. And you look at his record as a starter, you look at what he's been able to do both last year and this year, and you think, if we get the JJ McCarthy that he showed last week, there's going to be some problems for Michigan's offense. But the majority of his games, he's played well enough to be the better quarterback and to put Michigan in position to win.
Obviously, he's got a very productive run game behind him. Maybe not statistically as productive as in the past couple of years, but you still know what Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards can do. Is there any chance that we see something from this running game that you haven't seen this year coming in this game? I know some people have talked about those backs being in the backfield together more. What do you kind of expect from the run game against Ohio State?
Yeah, 100%. I don't know any secret facts about what they're going to pull out, but they will 100%. Yeah, they've got an ace up their sleeve that they've been saving for this game, as does Ohio State, right? There's no doubt about that. I think big picture, this running game has not been as good as last year. There's no kind of other way to slice that. They run for a yard per carry less than they did last year. They don't have nearly as many explosive plays. They haven't hit the home runs. And there's a couple reasons for that. The offensive line isn't quite as good as it was last year. No big surprise. They won the Joe Moore Award last year. They had, the Outland Trophy and Remington Trophy winner at center. They don't have that anymore, right? I also think Donovan Edwards, he's not the in between the tackles type runner that I think Michigan fans kind of expected him to be this year. But when you're looking at what the Michigan run game is going to look like against Ohio State, I think if they have to lean on one person, it's going to be Blake Corum. No doubt about that. He's the guy who returned for this year in large part because he wanted to play in this game. He has been, he was injured last year. Obviously, he got, I think, 2 carries for 5 yards on a torn meniscus. didn't go too well. He was banged up in 21, and he was the backup that year, but he was on a high ankle sprain, and he had that carry in the second half that a healthy Blake Corum probably breaks for a touchdown for him. That was like a 30-yard gain or something like that. But he is healthy for this game for the first time in his career, and Michigan will lean on him, right? He's a guy who is 5'8", but a bowling ball, right? He can out leverage people. He can turn 1 yard into 4 yards and 4 yards into 9 yards, and that's very important. He's not the home run type hitter. He doesn't have the top end speed that he had when he was lighter. He's also not quite as shifty maybe as last year, and that could be in part because he's coming off that knee injury. But I think if you're looking at curveballs that Michigan will throw at Ohio State, I think it's Donovan Edwards is who you look at. He's a guy who, again, not as good between the tackles, but he is extremely versatile. He is a guy who Michigan will run routes with out of the backfield. He's a guy that Michigan will split out as a slot receiver, as a wide receiver. And if you put a linebacker or a safety on him, that, especially a linebacker, like that's a one-on-one battle that Michigan feels like it's going to win. And he's just a headache for defenses, right? Because he can do so much. If he's on the field, if he's in motion, it opens up a lot. And we have not seen Corum and Edwards on the field at the same time a ton. We've seen Corum or Edwards with kind of the third down back, a former linebacker turned running back. But I do expect that we'll see something interesting, something unique that we haven't seen at all this year before.
Brad Kramer asked, and this kind of takes me into the next question, and coming off of surprising, he said, what are the odds the team up north comes out throwing the ball? We talked about JJ McCarthy. Obviously, Ohio State expects to have to defend the run. What does JJ McCarthy have receiver-wise? I know there's been some guys banged up in that room. Who do you expect to be kind of his top target? And then to Brad's question, could Michigan come out maybe throwing more than Ohio State might expect?
I do think that they have to get JJ McCarthy in a rhythm. Mm-hmm. So while the identity of the Michigan football team is still a team that wants to beat you in the trenches, and that means running the ball. The last couple of weeks, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but with Sharon Moore as the acting head coach, and he's the offensive coordinator and he's the offensive line coach, it has been a very conservative, hey, we're just going to run the ball at you a bunch and we're going to win the game that way. But I do think that given how little Michigan used McCarthy against Penn State and how kind of out of sync he was against Maryland, I do think that they're going to want to get him into a better rhythm. So that could involve, they're not going to throw the ball around to the level that Ohio State does. But I could see them getting that part of their offense going a little bit earlier than maybe last year. In terms of who McCarthy has as options, Roman Wilson is a guy to keep an eye on. He was out. He took a knock, probably like a head injury type thing early in that Maryland game. The Fox broadcast said that it was precautionary. It does sound like he's trending toward playing, but it's a head injury. So those type of things are, they're tough to predict and they're tough to kind of timeline out. But he is Michigan's top receiver, right? He's a Hawaii native who's a speedster. He can take the top off of defense. He's got great hands. Michigan uses him in motion a ton because when he's moving before the snap, it is tough to get someone, lined up against him. And, whether it's a quick out, whatever it is kind of passing wise, the bread and butter of the offense. So his health, something to keep an eye on heading into the game, but I do think he'll give it a shot to play. Besides him, Cornelius Johnson, obviously Ohio State fans know that name well after last year. He's a guy who number of targets, number of receptions, very similar to Roman Wilson. He just doesn't have like the touchdowns this year that Roman's had. Where I do think that Michigan does create mismatches. Listen, I like Roman Wilson. I like Cornelius Johnson. I like Michigan's receivers, but I do think that where they create the most mismatches is at their tight end position. They have Colston Loveland. Of course, he scored a touchdown against the Buckeyes last year. AJ Barner, who transferred over from Indiana last offseason. Both of those guys have been fantastic. Colston Loveland in particular, like he's a guy who's going to be playing on Sundays in a couple of years. He's a sophomore, but he's 6'5". He's a solid inline blocker, but he runs and catches like a wide receiver. And that's a guy that, again, if you have a linebacker on him, it's a one-on-one matchup that Michigan will seek out a lot, and it's one that it feels like it can win.
Over on the defensive side of the ball, we were talking on our morning podcast on Wednesday morning with Dave Biddle and Steve Hellwagon about the interior of Ohio State's offensive line against the interior defensive linemen for Michigan. To me, like that's one of the huge keys to this game is who wins that. And I think going into the game, I would probably favor Michigan. What do you see from those matchups and just Michigan's defensive line in general this year?
Yeah, I mean, the defensive line is the strength of the defense, and in particular, the interior of the defensive line. There's no Aiden Hutchinson. There's no David Ojabo on this team. Certainly, Michigan rotates 4 edge rushers who are solid, but they're not the game breakers that Michigan had in 21. When you're looking at the interior of the defensive line, Michigan has rotated a ton on defense this year. And one of the things I'm very curious about is, when you're in this game, does that rotation kind of slim down at all? Because you want to have your best guys out there. And who are those best guys? Well, you start with a guy who's going to be playing on Sundays next year, Chris Jenkins, son of an NFL vet, Chris Jenkins, but also a couple sophomores.
There's a few of those guys in this game with names of NFL vets.
Yeah. Can't think of any others. You look at then a couple sophomores in Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. Those are really your top 3, right? Chris Jenkins, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant. The 2 sophomores, Jim Harbaugh called them gifts from the football gods last year, just based on their body type, what they're able to do. Kenneth Grant, if you watch the Penn State game, chased down Katron Allen 30 yards downfield. That's him making a tackle, a 300+ pound defensive tackle, 30 yards downfield, making a tackle on a former 5-star running back. So like that's the type of, NFL type play that he's able to make. But yeah, that's the matchup to watch on the defense, because listen, I like the Michigan secondary. The linebackers are talented. They're veterans, but Michigan's going to want to have a lot of guys back in coverage. And the way you're able to do that is if your defensive tackles, with just the 2 of them, whichever 2 they are, if they can generate pass rush and if they can slow down the Ohio State rushing offense, they have been able to do that this year, right? Michigan's been able to generate pressure with just rushing 4. And if they're able to do that on Saturday, then that will allow the secondary to slow down your Igbuka, to slow down your Harrison, to, not shut them down, but keep plays in front of you and make Ohio State work the length of the field. And equally as importantly, keep Kyle McCord on his toes a little bit, keep him uncomfortable. That's the matchup. I think you're exactly right. Like that is what you want to circle, because everything else that Ohio State's able to accomplish and everything else that Michigan feels like it can run on defense stems from what its defensive tackles do against the Ohio State interior.
Yeah, I saw your colleague over at the Michigan Insider, Zach Shaw, put out a tweet this morning about Kyle McCord, 5th nationally in passer rating in a clean pocket, but 110th under pressure. His completion percentage drops from 72.7% to 38%. Yards per attempt drops from 10.3 to 4. Touchdown interception goes from 20 to 2 to 2 to 2. So I think Ohio State fans, without even hearing that stat, would probably maybe not come up with those numbers, but would recognize McCord has not been fantastic under pressure. So to your point, that battle will be huge. Another battle that's obviously going to be huge, Michigan's secondary against Ohio State's wide receivers. We alluded to Marvin Harrison Jr. just a minute ago, arguably the best receiver in the country. Still some talk about Heisman Trophy contention. I think that hinges a lot on what he does in this game. But the Buckeyes have gotten healthy. Emeka Egbuka is back and looked more like himself last week. Julian Fleming's in there, almost more so for his blocking than his catching, but you never know who makes a play in a game like this. The list goes on. Add in Cade Stover. How, in your eyes, does Michigan handle what Ohio State can bring when Kyle McCord is able to throw the ball?
Yeah, that's something I'm going to be very interested to see early on. Listen, the first offensive play of the game for Ohio State last year was supposed to be a flare, like a fade type play to Marvin Harrison Jr., who was matched up one-on-one with Will Johnson. And Will Johnson, who was a freshman last year, shut that play down, right? So Michigan doesn't like to do it, but they've done it before where they will shadow Will Johnson to whoever they feel is the top receiver that their opponent has. And obviously this week that would be Marvin Harrison Jr. when he's out on the field. I don't know if they're going to do that, but I could also see that they give that a run and see, listen, we're going to match up our best cover corner, who's a 5-star, who's going to be in the NFL, who had a solid game against them last year, going to put them one-on-one and see what happens. That being said, I expect the foundation of the Michigan defense in the secondary to be zones and to be mixing up zones and dropping guys into coverage and trying to keep Kyle McCord guessing. Because to all the stats you just mentioned, I think Kyle McCord in a clean pocket, and if he knows what he's looking at, I don't think Michigan's secondary holds up. I don't think any secondary in college football, for the most part, would hold up to that. I have my concerns with the secondary, and we've talked about this on shows before, right? Is that the Big Ten, outside of Ohio State and maybe Maryland, does not have passing offenses that are really threatening to anybody. And the reason that I still have my concerns is that, Michigan is starting a corner in Josh Wallace, who transferred from UMass last year and who has played well throughout this year. But he was at UMass for 4 years, and he was at UMass for a reason, right? He's been good, but he's gotten beat a few times this year on double moves, and he got beat badly. He got burned. I don't know if it was Ty Felton or who it was on Maryland last week, but Talia missed the throw, but that's a throw that I'd expect a McCord to make, or maybe Talia the very next snap, because he's so roller coaster type of quarterback. But the second corner position outside of Will Johnson was always a question mark coming into this year. And I don't know that, Michigan has had an answer in Josh Wallace, but he hasn't really been tested to the level that he's going to be tested this weekend. Similar with the safeties, right? Is Rod Moore, Makari Page. Rod Moore played in this game the last couple of years. In fact, he started in it as a freshman in 21, if I remember that correctly. Makari Page, very natural progression for him to step into a starting safety role. But they're two guys who are banged up for a good portion of the season early on. And while they're probably playing at a high level, they have not been tested a lot. They've had some issues with missed tackles, and it's Ohio State. It's Marvin Harrison. It's Cade Stover. It's Emeka Egbuka. It's all these guys. And we're at week 13 or, game 12 of the season, and there's still lingering doubts about the secondary that I have. So I'm very curious. It's got to be zones, right? You cannot go man-to-man. This isn't a Don Brown defense where, you're going man-to-man with single high safety as Michigan did under Don Brown, and Ohio State very much took advantage of it. So I think it's got to make things complicated for McCord, because if he doesn't know what he's looking at, that's when mistakes happen.
All right. The topic Buckeye fans most want to discuss, and I'm sure you're probably sick of talking about it, but
pre-game flyover. It's going to be awesome.
You mentioned it earlier. Sherrone Moore has been the acting head coach for the last 2 weeks, as Jim Harbaugh has been suspended. This all stems from, obviously, unless you've had your head under a rock the last month or so, the sign stealing investigation with the Big Ten and the NCAA. Just in general, however way you want to take this, how does this whole situation impact Saturday between noon and 3:30?
Oh, that's a loaded question. And I think I picked up a rock the other day. I was out for a walk, and even the rock asked me, what's going on with Jim Harbaugh. No, it's I have a lot of thoughts. Of course, I have a lot of thoughts. Everyone has a lot of thoughts. When it comes to the football game itself, listen, Jim Harbaugh's been suspended for half this season, right? It's as common for him to be on the sidelines as not. Where I have some question marks is with Sherrone Moore. He is going to be a head coach next year somewhere. There's very little doubt about that. I think he's very capable and absolutely deserving of being a head coach. But you think about all the hats that he has to wear on game day now, and it's acting head coach, it is offensive line coach, and it is offensive coordinator. And that is a lot for one person to do. And I just wonder what he sacrifices. Like, what things can he not do to his full potential because he has to be the head coach, right? Is it play sequencing, right? Is it, when you are able to watch the entire game, or if you were able to talk to your offensive line, and kind of coach them up, what are you missing because you have to be the acting head coach, because you have to have your eye, on what's going on pretty much at all times. When it comes to Jim Harbaugh being absent, I don't think it impacts a ton on game day, but I do wonder how it impacts JJ McCarthy specifically. Jim Harbaugh sees himself in JJ McCarthy. Yeah, I imagine JJ McCarthy kind of sees a little bit of himself in Jim Harbaugh. These are two people who are very tight with one another. Jim Harbaugh, of course, is a former quarterback, and Jim Harbaugh is the guy who before every game goes and slaps JJ on the shoulders and, gives him the pump up, and, during games gives him feedback on what he's seeing on the field. And what's different when your head coach is not a quarterback, but is, a former, offensive lineman and an offensive line coach in Sherrod Moore. What type of things are you missing there? And then big picture, I understand how people feel about the Michigan versus everybody kind of response from the team. I think it's a little bit silly in some regards too, and in most regards, really. Like, it's if you broke the rules and you're punished, you can't say Michigan versus everyone. It's just, maybe the consequence of your actions, even if Jim Harbaugh was not personally involved in it. That being said, as we saw with Kirby Smart in Georgia every year, right? Like, what is the best thing you can do to a team that is already talented and already successful? It's make people feel like everybody outside the program doubts you. And that's how Michigan feels right now. Michigan players, though they say they're keeping everything, focused on the game, it's a one-track mind. You can't go anywhere in the sports world right now and not hear about how Michigan's success last year and the year before was due to the fact that they cheated, right? That the only reason they won the Big Ten, the only reason they beat Ohio State is because they had the signs. So I think there is motivation there to prove that they are, that the team is not just, hey, we knew what was coming and that's why we beat you. It's, we beat you because we are more physical than you in the trenches. We beat you because we are better players, because we are a better program, whatever it is. I think there is a lot of motivation there. And I think it's from both sides. It will turn the rivalry up to 11, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
That it will be. Alejandro, thank you for jumping on with us. A lot of good insight from you. I've enjoyed our little chats each Monday this year. As I said on your show, I will miss doing those, though we could just keep it up. We got basketball season. We can talk basketball. Yep. So no one wants to hear about Ohio State basketball right now. But thank you very much. Thanks for talking with us all year. I know you've been on this a couple times now, so I do appreciate it. And I will see you in Ann Arbor on Saturday.
Yep. Safe travels. See you at the big house.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks again. All right. That was Alejandro Zuniga, one of our writers over at the Michigan Insider on 24/7 Sports. I would tell you to go over there and read their writing as I do most weeks, but I know that has not been the recipe for success between these two teams, and especially with some of the stuff that's gone on their site, Alejandro and Zach excluded. Maybe just stick to Bucknuts or any Ohio State site this week and read about whatever comes next when it comes. We're going to get into this game more from the Ohio State perspective here shortly. Hopefully we'll be joined by Tyvis Powell and Timmy Hall from 97.1 The Fan. Excited to have Tyvis back on to talk Buckeyes. I saw a couple questions come in. I figure I'll answer these while we wait for those two guys to jump in here. Brad Kramer asks, what role do you see Dallin Hayden playing? Feels like he's the secret weapon in this game. Honestly, and this is just me, I know I've heard other people say otherwise, I don't expect Dallin Hayden to be very involved. Would I involve him in this game? Probably, because I think he's a really talented running back who could help the Buckeyes. But for whatever reason, Ryan Day and his staff are insistent on, we're only going to use Dallin Hayden in small bits here and there, or when we have to. He can play in one more game, so maybe they've got something cooked up where Dallin Hayden's going to be involved more than he has, but you've just seen so little of him this year, and even last season, they didn't play him until they were forced to. It would surprise me, which maybe means they will do it this year. But I would be very surprised if Dallin Hayden has some bigger role in this game other than maybe, coming in if Ohio State is up big, or, if somebody gets hurt and he needs to come into the game. That's kind of my thinking. Let's get into some of this here. We've got Timmy Hall from 97.1 The Fans, the Buckeye Show, and Tyvis Powell live from his car. What's going on, guys?
Now that's dedication.
Hello.
That is
dedication, Tyvis, from the car. And look, I'm in a Blue Jacket studio. Oh, hey,
Tyvis, Pat. Hi, Calvin, man.
Are you driving the car?
I am driving the car. I'm almost at home, though. I'm like literally 2 minutes away.
Try not to die.
You look like the Ayatollah Khomeini from Back to the Future. You're just glitching out there. You working?
No,
as long as you.
I'm good. Yeah.
As long
He's
as we
dropping
can
off
hear
a
you.
big bag of cash at some recruit's house.
Yes. NIL, baby.
Oh, my
Bringing a
goodness.
big fish.
All right, have fun. Buckeyes win 27-24.
You heard it there. So, Tyvis, I was going to drink some of the 1870 Boom beer on this podcast, but I decided in your honor I would go sober for this show, even though it's the Bucknuts Happy Hour. No, actually, I just didn't grab it in time and forgot to do it before the show started. Well, look at that, Timmy. You got stealing signs in there?
Yeah, we got a Matt from Saucy just came by and dropped off a little 4-pack of these. They were assigned to T-Bone. T-Bone knows the man, and T-Bone was nice enough to give me one of them out of the 4-pack. So it's not cracked open. I figured this could be the victory brew, Pat. Maybe if they don't win, I never drink it. I don't get to taste what the stealing signs is like. I mean, it's a hazy IPA, so I can figure it out. But I'm only going to drink this if we're victorious.
All right.
Well,
Let's get into it. Tyvis, I want to ask you, when you were watching this game growing up versus once you got in and were playing in this game, how different was it from what you expected it to be, watching it as a fan to actually being a player on the field?
Well, it's a huge difference. I mean, the biggest difference is, you don't get to see the emotion behind it. Like, yeah, you grow up and you grow that hatred for that team. But until you actually on the field and you see the energy and the motivation that they have to try to come take your head off, you really won't understand it. So, my freshman year, I redshirted and I got to just watch it from the sidelines. And I just seen just the energy that our players had to have. I remember, I'll never forget, it was Christian Bryant. And he went like insane because he like made Denard Robinson fumble the ball or something like that. And I just remember the look in his face after he did that. I was like, oh my goodness, this is how I gotta be next year when it's my time to get on the field. So when my time came, I knew that I had to be ready to die. I had to be ready to die over trying to win this game. And that was just, you don't get that from being a fan at home and watching it. You have to be in the game to truly understand that part.
Yeah, that makes sense. Tim, I know you did not grow up with this, though you've embraced the rivalry since you've been in Columbus and on the Fan. What do you remember about this game? I don't know if it was before you got here or afterwards, but what like stands out as your first memory of Ohio State?
Yeah. Well, I get asked that. I get asked that a lot, Pat.
Sure.
And I guess I come from it from a different perspective. You hear about players that are big time recruits, and look, Ohio State scours the earth now, right? Not just the United States of America. Look at Hero Canoe to find the best talent. And Kyle McCord's been asked about this, being a Philly kid, and what his views of the rivalry were growing up. And the thing of it is, it's such a big time matchup. So it doesn't matter where you're from. If you are a fan of sports, you are going to have some kind of connection and link to this rivalry. The big season for me, and look, I'm 39 years old, so I was kind of getting into my wheelhouse in the 2002 national championship run.
Yeah.
That's the year I graduated high school, right? So I'm a red-blooded football fan at that point in my life, and I had one of my good buddies from high school came out to where I was living at the time. We were doing a little skiing, and we were watching, all the big football games at the end of the year. And, Ohio State, Michigan was there. And that 2002 season, I remember the Buckeyes from several of those big games because my parents were Purdue alums. So, of course, you've got the Holy Buckeye game. So that one, I wouldn't say I was a Purdue fan, but kind of like Chops here on the station with his Iowa background. I wasn't actively rooting against my parents' alma mater. I'm interested in everything that's going on in that college football season, but certainly that 2002 game when they sealed their undefeated regular season, that's one of the first ones for me. And then the first year that I was here doing this job, I came in the middle of the 2012 football season. So time has flown, and here we are in 2023, but it was that year where they're not eligible. That season gets talked about a lot. Tyvus was there, and I really remember the guy that wasn't there, and he talked about sort of the mood from one of his teammates. Now I got to be ready to die in this game. The fact that John Simon wasn't around for that one was one of my biggest memories, and just all of the camaraderie around him. Who I talk about Urban's Thanksgiving table on the show a lot. It's perfect because here we are around Thanksgiving. John Simon has an armchair at the head of one of those tables. He's pushing Tim Tebow out of the house. Like, he's such an Urban Meyer guy. And the fact that he's not in that game, but they go out there and they win it. If there was any way possible, right? It's like we get to Tommy Eichenberg coming up this week. He would have played, but I know that was a lot, but that's just a lot of my thoughts on growing up and the first one here at the station and everything that is Ohio State, Michigan.
All right, Tim, I know you have a hard out here because you've got some work or something to do. I just want to get your overall thoughts on this year's matchup and maybe throw in how you think the Michigan scandal situation will affect this game.
I don't know if the Michigan scandal affects this game maybe more than like 2 or 3%. It's not going to factor in much for me because I haven't thought about it in a couple of days now. It is a one-track mind. It is full focus. Everything that Ohio State needs to be doing has nothing to do with what's already been done with the scandal, and they were stealing signs. That goes to bed. This is a game that's about what it's always about: physicality, toughness in the trenches, running the football when you can run the football, stopping the run on defense. That's everything that this is about. Running the football might be my biggest area of concern for Ohio State on offense, even though I feel better about that lately because of what Travion Henderson has provided for this offense. I feel like if they keep peppering and stay to it, even if they do have some 0, 1, or 2 yard carries, that eventually they'll get that 15-yarder, maybe that 25, maybe that 50-yarder that we're going to remember. But I think it's going to come down to that, where it's a ground and pound, first to 3 touchdowns wins this game with how good the defenses are. And as far as the scandal, Pat, I don't think it amounts to much anymore.
Tyvus, similar question to you, but does what's happened up in Ann Arbor, you talk about having been a part of this rivalry, does that boil your blood maybe a little bit more than someone like Tim or I who are looking at this from the outside in?
You know what? I mean, yes, but listen, I'm a realist. I give people credit where credit's due. Yeah, did they steal signs? Yeah. Did they cheat? Yeah. But, I really wasn't upset with them stealing signs for the most part. The part that I was upset with, like in 2021, they just completely out physicaled us. Like that's I don't think stealing signs had anything to do with that. And then in 2022, last year, I thought that they kind of out schemed us. You know, stealing signs had nothing to do with Donovan Edwards breaking a long run or Cornelius Johnson being left wide open on a busted coverage. Like stealing signs had nothing to do with those things. So when I think about this season with all of the scandals that's going on, I think that for a lot of people, you know, they take those last two dubs and put an asterisk by it because of the scandal. But I think this year, obviously, there will be no cheating going on. But I think that for this team, I think that they're doing it for C.J. Stroud, you know, Paris Johnson, DeJuan Jones, you know, guys like Zach Harrison. Like that's what this game to me, if I was playing, that's what this is about. Because as great as a quarterback as CJ was, a guy who's dedicated, your leader, a guy who, as of really recently, just found out he got cheated out of these two games. So it's about doing this for him and trying to get that legacy back and let him know, hey, bro, we would have won with you. They just cheated you out of it. So I think that's what the motivation behind this year is. And obviously, you know, for Ryan Day to try to get back to that 500 record, I think he's what 1-2 against him to get back to 500 to be 2-2. I think it's a ton of motivation that's going to be there for him.
Tyvis, on that last note, it's one thing about winning for those players that didn't get a chance to. I haven't heard this talked about much this week, but we hit on it a little bit last week. Do you think everyone in that locker room wants to try to win this one for Ryan Day to get some of the noise out of there about him?
Absolutely. I mean, listen, they love Ryan Day. Ryan Day is probably the most genuine, authentic coaches in college. I mean, I've never seen a coach like Ryan Day that genuinely cares about his players all the way through, you know, whether they're doing something for you or not. And you got to respect a guy like that because obviously they hear the noise too. They get on Twitter, they see social media, they see the things that people say about their coach. And if it's a guy that you respect and you love and admire, you want to only keep him in positive light. They know the great things that he do for this school and this program, and they never want to lose a guy like that. So they're gonna go out there and they're gonna play as hard as they absolutely can for somebody that they love.
Tyvis, when you look at some matchups in this game, what stands out the most to you from what Ohio State needs to do versus Michigan on that side of the ball and vice versa?
I think that for me, the key to this game is the offensive line on both teams.
Okay.
Because in the past, I thought the Wolverines' offensive line was really good. And this year, I can't necessarily say that. I think I've seen them get beat up a couple of times. So, and I think that our offensive line, obviously, we've seen that they're a work in progress. As of late, they've been so much better. But this game is going to be about who can run the ball the best. Because whoever can run the ball the best, that defense is going to sell out trying to stop that. And now the passing game becomes a factor. Obviously, last year they went into that game thinking we're going to do everything we can to stuff the run and make J.J. McCarthy beat us. And guess what? He did. So same thing this year. I think they're going to have to do that same thing, but that secondary is so much better. That defense is so much better. I mean, they're not even giving up more than 7 points in the second half of games. So I think that's a key part for us. I think they want to find out if Kyle McCord can actually beat them. I think that's the test. Obviously, we've seen him do it against Notre Dame, and he was able to get that done. But in a rivalry game, even C.J. Stroud couldn't get it done. So what makes them think that Kyle McCord can? So I think the game is going to somehow, some way get put on Kyle McCord's shoulders, and he has to deliver.
I will say, though, I think C.J. Stroud couldn't get it done because his defense kept failing again and again and again. And there's only so much a man can do. And I like I said it before, I think the defense has improved to a point now where if I'm confident that if you get 3 touchdowns on the board, you win this game. That's what I think. And Urban was on our station this morning. Urban was on Morning Juice. And he had something interesting about the perception of Michigan's run game. If you look up, Michigan's lines have been good, right? Like they've been good these last few years. Again, though, we also got to factor in, you know, how the depths they went to stealing signs and was that defensive line maybe more privy to when you talk, Tyvis, when you're scouting 3rd and short, 3rd and medium, 3rd and long, 3rd and extra long, what are these guys going to run? Maybe that helps. But overall, they've had players they've pumped into the pros. O-line, D-line has been good. But their run game is only 49th in the country. That's not dominant by any metric. When you think about what Michigan's backs have been with Corum and Edwards and how they ran all over Ohio State in a couple of those games, 49th in the country isn't that. And his point about how they ran it 32 times against Penn State, that was more about how dead in the water Penn State's offense was and how much trust Michigan had in its defense. So I'd like to hope and I'd like to think that with Tommy Eichenberg back and a solid defensive line for the Buckeyes, that they can stop the run and maybe make this game go to some other area where it's going to be won. And like Tyva said, if Kyle McCord's got to throw the ball, I like the weapons. I like the weapons that Ohio State has. And I think Emeka Egbuka getting back into the mix is a major, major factor in this football game.
All right, Tim, I know you got to go. So thank you for jumping on. Tyvis, I got 2 more questions for you. Timmy, I'll talk to you for – what are we doing, the podcast version of the Buckeye Show this week?
Yeah. We've got with the holiday here and some Buckeye men's basketball. Go Bucks. Friday they got a game against Alabama, so that'd be nice if you can swing that into game day on Saturday. Big one for them. But yeah, we'll put something on the Buckeye Show podcast feed with our beers and Buckeyes. No drinking the stealing signs yet though.
Nope, not yet. All right, thanks, Tim. We'll
All
talk
right,
to you soon.
Go Bucks.
All right, Tyvis. One thing I'm interested in seeing in this game is how the Buckeyes use Sonny Styles. I think if Lathan Ransom were healthy, we'd have a better idea. But what do you envision Sonny's role being, given that he has been moved back to that bandit position as opposed to the bigger nickel spot he was playing earlier in the year?
I think that when you look at, the options, okay, so, yeah, would you like to have Sonny Styles in the box where he was comfortable at, where he was making the plays? Absolutely. But I think that to be just the fact that Josh Proctor's back, I think Josh Proctor fits that role more than he fits the post safety role. Obviously, last year we seen him in that post and it wasn't great. He struggled a bunch there. So I think Sonny has more athletic ability and more upside in the post, which is why he will be playing that post this game and why Josh Proctor has to be effective, which he has been unbelievable this season. So I think that's why it's better fit that Josh Proctor stays in the box.
And then one of the questions a bunch of the players were asked yesterday was about keeping your emotions in check in a game like this. You see the highlights before the game every year. You see the pushing and the shoving, all sorts of stuff that's gone on the field, but you don't want to have that happen and have you lose 15 yards in a big play. From your time in these games, what's the key to kind of balancing that emotion that comes with a big rivalry game, the big rivalry game like this one?
It's just being smart, and that the thing is, and I think this is where we failed at last year, because I think we had I think G. Scott actually had the personal foul penalty.
Yeah.
Just keep it between the whistles. Between the whistles, you're free to do whatever. You can be as physical as you want. You can talk trash as much as you want. Just keep it between the whistles, and you got to be smart. You can't allow the emotions of the game and what the things that they saying distract you from the main goal. If that's going to help you get to where you want to get, cool. Keep it towards the whistle. You can, like I said, nobody's telling you not to be physical. Nobody's telling you to do the extra stuff. You block as hard as you can. You come up and you fit as hard as you can, but make sure you do it when the whistle is going. And if you can do that, that's how you pretty much stay level-headed. They're gonna try to bait you into everything, but you don't have to take the bait. Listen, they can talk crazy to you. Anybody can say something crazy to you while the plays is being called. They tell them to keep that same energy when that ball gets snapped. Then we could talk about it. Then we can see if you really are about what you're talking about. So I think that's the approach that you got to take in these games.
You have a score prediction ready for this one yet, or are you waiting?
I've been on I feel like this is like a 21-17 type of game. One of those, yeah.
Buckeyes, right?
If I have to say that, then what do I look like saying the other team? That makes no sense. 21-17.
Yeah. All right, Tyvis, thanks a bunch. I know you are one of the busiest men in sports right now, so I appreciate your time and insight. It was good stuff. I appreciate it. We'll talk soon, man.
No problem. Go Bucks.
All right. Thanks to Tyvis and Timmy Hall there for jumping on. If you don't listen when they are on the Buckeye Show together, and I do like the Fan. I'm on the Fan occasionally. They don't pay me any money to say this. I think Tyvis and Timmy are one of the best duos on sports talk radio. And Tyvis has blossomed into unsurprisingly, quite the personality on sports talk radio. So if you're in Columbus, you have the 97.1 The Fan app, I recommend listening when those two are together. All right, I want to give some final thoughts here before we end this week's happy hour. We're pushing on a full hour here, which we haven't done in a little while. So there was another question, or at least a comment, that popped up earlier before Tyvis and Timmy came on. I didn't get a chance to. But we did kind of touch on that. Sonny Styles will cover Michigan's tight ends, GOJ said. I think it's going to be interesting. Like I was just asking Tyvis how Sonny Styles is used in this game, because I think in the ideal world, you have Lathan Ransom at the Bandit. You can use Sonny Styles as that bigger nickel to cover the tight ends, to help in the run game, those type of things. But with Lathan out, you don't have that guy in there. Now, we did see last week a little bit when Minnesota went with 2 tight ends on the field. Jim Knowles brought Jihad Carter, the Syracuse safety, who has not played much this year, into the game and moved Sonny back to that big nickel position. If that happens, I will be interested. It's a big moment to thrust a guy like Jihad Carter in, and especially when Jordan Hancock has played as well as he has. But Jim Knowles did say this weekend, Jordan has shown he has the ability to go up and make hits against the run and can do that, but they don't want to use him that way as much because he's got a smaller frame than some of those other guys. Obviously, you don't want a guy like that to get hurt. So I'll be interested to see how they use Sonny and kind of what the game plan is against Michigan's talented tight ends, because they certainly have them. While I finish up with a couple more comments, I've seen some score predictions thrown in here, so throw yours out there in the comments if you're watching this live. Timothy Mulford said 31-13 Ohio State. I'll try and pull up some other ones here. GOJ said Ohio State 42-17. That is a big difference. Julian Foreman, Denzel going Thanos on Michigan 35-17. If I missed any other ones, feel free to throw them back in there. Jonathan Dickens 38-17 Buckeyes. Everyone's really confident here. I like that. So I think that a couple keys that we've touched on, but I want to elaborate on a little bit more. This is a big moment for Kyle McCord. I don't think I need to explain that, but look, as we touched on with Tyvis and Timmy, CJ Stroud didn't win this game. And it wasn't CJ Stroud's fault he didn't win this game, either of the 2 years he started in it. But this could be and I've said this a couple weeks, I think Kyle McCord is making progress to a big senior year next season, but a big stepping off point for him if he can beat Michigan. And he doesn't even need to be the reason they beat Michigan. He has to make some throws. He's definitely going to have to make some throws. He may have to lead a big drive late in the game, things like that. But, I don't think he needs a throw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns in this game. But if he can be the quarterback that ends Michigan's 2-game winning streak, especially with everything else going on here, kind of the talk that's surrounded him throughout this year, I think that's a big confidence booster for Kyle McCord. And not even only for next season, but for a Big Ten championship game against really good defense in Iowa. And then there's this college football playoff that's likely sitting out there if Ohio State, well, almost certainly sitting out there if Ohio State wins this game. I think that could really help Kyle be prepared for the bigger challenges or equal challenges that are coming against Iowa's defense and then potentially in the college football playoffs. So I think this is a huge moment for Kyle. I don't think he's going to be I don't think the moment's going to be too big for him, but if he can come out of there as the quarterback that won this game, especially against a guy in J.J. McCarthy, who was in his class, was also being recruited by Ohio State, they being the Buckeyes and Ryan Day, picked Kyle McCord. I think that's huge. The guy that I think that could be the difference maker, and obviously Marvin Harrison Jr. is one of them. If they want to really put the attention to covering Marvin Harrison Jr. and Mecca Igbukah, but we touched on him a little bit. TreVeyon Henderson. Since he's come back from injury, TreVeyon Henderson has been a different player. Let me read to you TreVeyon Henderson's game log since he's come back. Against Wisconsin, 24 carries, 160 yards, 1 touchdown, 4 catches, 45 yards. Against Rutgers, 22 carries, 128 yards, 1 touchdown, 5 catches, 80 yards. Against Michigan State, basically just played the first half, 13 carries, 63 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 catches, 14 yards. Last week against Minnesota, 15 carries, 146 yards, 2 touchdowns. That included the big 75-yard run to start the second half, 2 receptions, 26 yards. He has not been healthy. We talked about this on the Bucknuts Morning 5 on Wednesday morning. He has not been healthy in this game. He didn't play last year, was banged up as a freshman. This is as healthy as we've seen Travion this late in the year. It's not just the 75-yard touchdown play. Maybe he doesn't even get one of those, but like the first play from Ohio State offensively last week was a 15-yard run that kind of set the tone against Minnesota. And it was a well-blocked run, and then he just runs through some arm tackles, picks up 15 yards, Buckeyes are off and running. You need those plays from TreVeyon Henderson. If you can hit the home run, great. If he can score a big touchdown that flips momentum or gives Ohio State an even bigger lead, I think that's great. But those runs that, get you a first down on 1st and 10 and get the sticks moving, or maybe even get you 8 yards so that you're in 2nd and short, plays like that he's become better and better at throughout this season, I think are going to be huge. Defensive side of the ball, I know we've talked about Tommy Eichenberg a lot. I think getting him back for this game, and Ryan Day said again on his radio show, everyone should be back except Lathan Ransom, I think is huge for this team. I know it hasn't been the best season for these linebackers at times, but this is a game that Tommy Eichenberg really matters in, and I think he could be a big difference maker for the Buckeyes. Having Mike Hall back is going to be big too. He only missed 1 game. Tommy Eichenberg has missed the last couple. So I think not only what he gives you on the field, but the fact that he's going to be fired up having to miss these last 2 games. Ryan Day said after the game, it was basically a fist fight to tell Tommy Eichenberg he wasn't going to play on his senior day. Whoo! I would not want to be the first person to take a hit from Tommy Eichenberg on Saturday against Michigan. So yeah, I think that those are kind of the guys. I think Cade Stover too could be an interesting one. I saw a couple more predictions come in here. We'll throw these up here. Michael Hester, Buckeyes 40, Team Up North 7, big score there. Heath Swartz, OSU 27-13. Cody Nelson says he's thinking 28-14. I assume that's Ohio State. Chris Miller, Buckeyes 24-14. Bob Byers 24-22. Again, I expect that was a Buckeyes win there. As I said on the Bucknuts Morning 5, I haven't made a prediction yet. Certainly leaning Buckeyes, especially after the last couple of weeks where Michigan looked vulnerable. So coming up with the what you'll be reading headline, Jeff Beachuk, 69-0 OSU. That would be something. Timothy Sprague, 34-13. Anyway, coming up with what you'll be reading on Sunday, a bit more difficult this week just because I think if you're one of the people like my girlfriend who doesn't function well during tight games, I get text messages that I don't read till after the game of her freaking out during Buckeye games that are remotely close. If you're one of those people, get started early, do whatever you have to do to calm down, because I think this is going to be 3.5, 4 hours of just a rock fight. I can't imagine that this score looks like it has the last 2 years in terms of, one team really pulling away. I think it's going to be just a fight. Maybe one team gets a touchdown late to make the score look a little different. But boy, I think if you're one of those people that's anxious during football games, be prepared for an anxious Saturday afternoon. But look, this is the main reason why we love watching the Buckeyes, right? It's not for the wins at the beginning of the season against Youngstown State, right? Those are great. It's fun. The Buckeyes are going to win. It's a stress-free day. It's not for Notre Dame at night. That was an awesome game. Had a great time. Anyone who was there, I imagine you had a fantastic time. If you watched it at home, that was fun. It's not for Penn State. at home. It's for this game. This is the game that, Buckeye Nation is about. And we get it once a year. It's almost here. We've got a couple more days here. Enjoy your Thanksgiving holiday. Try not to stress out too much when you're around your family, unless everybody's stressing out about it. And, try and enjoy it as much as you can on Saturday in Ann Arbor. I think it's going to be, like I said, a hell of a game. I didn't have my beer today, so I can't send you out with a chug, but cheers, Buckeye fans. We will, regardless of whatever happens, we'll be back next week. Hopefully we'll be talking Big Ten championship game and Buckeyes, Iowa. If not, we'll have a couple beers here and be in sorrow together, because I certainly want to go to Indy and I want to keep the dream alive of going back and covering the playoffs. So talk to you guys soon. After the games, Steve and I will be on Dave's What We Learned Live. Plenty more stuff on Bucknuts. Thanks again to Alejandro Zuniga of our Michigan site at 24/7 Sports. And thanks again to Tyvis Powell and Timmy Hall from The Fan for jumping on, talking Buckeyes with us. We'll see you guys after the game on Saturday. Should be